You might have a vision for what you want, and that's great. I think you should still keep that in mind, but also be very open to things changing, because while there are lots of things that you can control, like what you eat, what you're doing during pregnancy, the type of care that you have or that you choose, those are choices that you can make. But there are many circumstances that'll happen that might change other aspects of that pregnancy and that birth that are outside of your control. And to just recognize that if things happen that were not what you planned, to not hold any guilt for that, to release that and be like, I've done what I can to release that and I can't control these outside circumstances.
Welcome to the Happy Home Birth Podcast, your source for positive natural childbirth stories and your community of support, education, and encouragement in all things home birth and motherhood. What is the balance when it comes to preparing for our birth, but also holding it with an open hand, knowing that outside factors can contribute to our experience? Hey there, happy home birthers, and welcome to episode 279 of the Happy Home Birth Podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Fusco, and today we're speaking to Sara West. Sara and her husband Andrew live on Florida's sunny Space Coast with their 4 children. Her passions include writing, singing, drawing, and crocheting, though she has a little less time for those things while starting her homeschooling journey and bringing up toddlers. Sara's birth journey began in the hospital and transitioned over to the home birth world with her 3rd baby. We will hear how and why she made this transition and how she approached her birthing experiences as she learned more and increased her understanding of what birth preparation can entail. Now, before we jump in, I want to take a moment to share about a ministry that truly stands out to holistic families like my own, Samaritan Ministries. One of the many things that I love about Samaritan is that they share bills for medical needs that many insurance plans will not cover. Want to know a perfect example of this? Oh, I don't know. How about home birth? How many times have I heard mothers complain that their insurance won't touch their home birth bills? Not the case with Samaritan. It's such an incredible system built on Christ-like principles. I've got a link in the show notes where you can learn more. Fill out the form. Someone from Samaritan will reach out to provide more information. And as a thanks from me, you will receive the first module of Happy Home Birth Academy for free. Okay, let's waste no time and dive in. Please remember that the opinions of my guests may not necessarily reflect my own and vice versa. And this show is not medical advice, it's an educational tool. So continue to take empowered responsibility for your health and your family. Sara, thank you so much for coming on the Happy Home Birth Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Caitlin. I'm super excited. This is kind of a dream come true for me, actually.
Okay, that is so kind. And it is so exciting for me too. I mean, I really cannot express just how joyful it is to get to read over so many people's birth stories and then to actually be able to select some to come and have them flesh everything out. It is a joy every single time. So thank you for taking the time to do that. Thank you for taking the time to be here now. And would you mind just kind of kicking us off by introducing yourself and your family to the listeners?
Sure. My name is Sara, and my husband Andrew and I have 4 kids now. The newest one is 3 months old, and he's my second home birth. Very happy about that. And we've got 3 girls and 1 boy. We live on the Space Coast of Florida, and I'm just a stay-at-home mom and starting homeschooling this year. And so that's going to be an exciting adventure for sure.
It is exciting. It is a big transition, at least it was for my family, just shifting gears into schooling and what is it going to look like. And I feel like it took us a couple of years to really kind of get the ball rolling and decide like this is the kind of curriculum that we want and this is how we want to do it and all of that. So God bless. God bless you on your journey.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really excited. I'm very nervous, but I was homeschooled K through 12 myself, and I've got a mom who has amazing resources and just an amazing teacher. So, I got a lot of help in my corner too.
Oh, that's amazing. That's fantastic. Wow. Okay, awesome. Well, let's talk about these kiddos. So, with your first, this one that you're about to start homeschooling, first baby, I'd love to hear where you and Andrew were in terms of, what you wanted for childbirth and how that kind of unfolded.
Yeah, so I mean, I always wanted to be a mom. That was kind of my thing. Like, I just wanted to get married and be a mom. And so I was working and met my husband, and we talked early on about having kids and how important that was to us. And I said, as soon as we have our baby, I'm going to quit work and stay at home. And he's like, all right, let's do it. So I got pregnant shortly after we got married in late 2018, and unfortunately, that ended up being a miscarriage. And so that was really hard to start a marriage with that happening. But I didn't know anything other than you go to the hospital, you have an OB. That's just what you do. I didn't really, it's not that I didn't know about midwifery or home birth. It wasn't really on my radar. And so I went with the traditional medical system. They had hospital midwives. So the care was a little bit more personalized, but it was still very, medical. Everything obviously is under an obstetrician. So I kind of went along with the recommendations and didn't really have any other direction, as far as I did the research that I could at the time, but it was still very medical. So, yeah, we had that loss happen, and I immediately got pregnant right after that with our rainbow baby. And again, I was seeing nurse midwives at the hospital, and they were wonderful, provided really great care. But again, everything was, we have to do this and we have to do this. And I'm just like, okay, you're the professional. I trust you. Not really tuning into what I was feeling about the pregnancy, about what I wanted for birth. They did give us a big list of like birth preferences at the hospital, which was really cool. But other than that, I really, I did some cursory research, and I knew that if, you do different interventions at the hospital, it can lead to, the possibility of like a C-section that, maybe wasn't necessary. So I was definitely like a little bit worried going into it that there were going to be interventions, and I did not want an induction. And unfortunately, we came up on 40 weeks and they said, we have to do the NST, we have to do the biophysical profile, and went through all of that, still had to have an induction. And 3 days of that, my daughter was born, no major issues. So because we had a decent experience at the hospital, it wasn't what I wanted, but it was still it wasn't a bad experience.
Okay, so you had this first birth experience, which it's like you're saying, it's not like there was anything like horribly traumatic about it. Maybe not what looking back now, knowing what you know now, you would have preferred for yourself, but with the information that you had, this was okay. So you've had this experience at the hospital. What was your thought when you became pregnant the next time, or how did that pregnancy unfold as well?
So the second time that I got pregnant, this was right in the middle of COVID. So it was mid 2020, and a lot had changed at the hospital. The policies were different and the care was different too. So even though I was seeing the same people, the care felt very detached. I didn't feel like it was as personal. And then early on, we had ultrasound that looked concerning. There was some extra fluid on her neck that they said could be an indication of something being wrong. So we had follow up ultrasounds, and they were saying, we have these markers for, could be trisomy 18, it could be trisomy 21. They even said it could be a 50% chance of it being Down syndrome. And so we went into that just saying, okay, we're trusting the Lord. This is our baby. We're going to take care of her no matter what happens. But it was still scary to hear all of those things. And I remember the call that I got when they had the test results from the ultrasound, and they wanted to follow up with maternal fetal medicine. And she was like, yeah, the results were concerning. We want you to come in again and have, another ultrasound. And just the way that she delivered the news was so cold. That's the only word that I can think to describe it. And I'm crying on the phone because I'm thinking there's something wrong with my baby. And I'm like, can my husband come with me? I need my husband there in case it's bad news. And they wouldn't make any exceptions because of the COVID policies. So I really had to go through a lot of that pregnancy, not alone, but he wasn't at my side like he was for the first two. And it was really scary with navigating the potential of there being something wrong. I'm happy to say that by the 20-week anatomy scan, those markers that they saw were pretty much gone. They did see a little bit of concerning information about her heart, but other than that, it looked like she looked okay. So going into the birth, we lived about an hour away from the hospital at that point. We had moved, and but I still wanted to stay at the hospital that I went to before because I was comfortable with the people there. The hospital itself I knew was good. And so we drove an hour to the hospital when I was having some contractions, and I left my daughter with my mom. And we get to the hospital, and they checked me in because I was apparently contracting and dilating enough for them to do that. They still put me on Pitocin, and at that point, I was like, okay, I'm just going to get the epidural because I'd had it before. I didn't want it, but I'm like, I just, we're going to do it this time. I'm a little more comfortable with it. So her birth went really smooth, no complications with the birth. But as soon as she was born, they said she had a short cord. They cut her cord and took her right over to the workstation. Nobody told me what was happening. So I'm kind of just sitting there getting stitched up, and they're still over there working, and nobody's telling me what's happening to her. I'm kind of trying to look over and see, if I can just see what they're doing. And I finally asked, I don't know if I was just in shock or something. I just didn't think to ask when she was first taken over there. But finally I said, is she okay? And they're like, well, she's just having a little trouble breathing. We might have to take her over to the NICU. So I got to hold her for about 5 minutes, and they took her right to the NICU. My husband went with her. And just that whole experience afterward was it was cold. I was obviously very upset about just what happened and not really knowing why and if she was going to be okay. And I was crying in the bed while I was getting stitched up and cleaned up. And none of the nurses like sat next to me or came over to say, are you okay? Or, is there anything that we can do? Or even like given a reassurance, like, your baby's going to be okay. It was just, I felt very alone. And I was able to call my mom and my mother-in-law and talk to them for a little bit, but still it's different not to have somebody at your side just giving you some reassurance. So I was in that room for hours, and every so often I'd sign a form. Every so often somebody would come in and say, "Okay, we might have to transfer her to another hospital because we need to have an ENT look at her." So we signed the paperwork for both of us to be transferred to a bigger hospital in Orlando. And I just remember feeling so broken and uncared for. And I finally got to see her before they transferred her. And again, it was only like 10 minutes that I could be there holding her. And then they took her away again. And I just remember being in the back of the ambulance and seeing the sign of the hospital go by and be like, this is not how I wanted to leave the hospital. And feeling so out of control during that whole scenario. So we had a 9-day NICU stay. And I knew that I could advocate for her, but I didn't know how or what was appropriate because when your child is in the NICU, you're under the impression that this is very serious. And so we went with their recommendations, and she had a heart episode and arrhythmia in the hospital right before we were about to be discharged, and they put her on medication. And so that was really scary too. And, scary. And my child just had arrhythmia, and then now she's on medication, and you're trusting that the doctors are doing everything that is necessary. But there's also that part of you, like that gut feeling like, is this right for my child? Having to navigate that, finding that balance between, okay, I'm going to trust what the doctors say, but also I knew in my heart that she was ready to go home, and she thrived once we were home. But it definitely left me feeling like, was there something that I should have done? Could I have prevented any of this? And that just kind of kicked off some of the research. I think it inspired me to kind of look for community, and that led me to doing some more research about birth that
Mm.
I hadn't really done before.
Wow. Oof. One of the things that just really sticks out to me in what you just shared, that whole saga really, through the pregnancy, through the birth, through the NICU stay is, okay, this was during the height of COVID and the coldness and sense of isolation that you experienced. It's psychologically crazy to me thinking about that period of time and how you are so right. I mean, as a whole, people's demeanor just changed. I mean, like it really changed in this very dramatic way. And we're like putting these masks on, or people are putting these masks on, and like it's almost like dehumanizing everyone. So it's so much easier to just be like, "Ugh, sorry, your baby's, maybe got a big problem. Your baby's maybe got something super concerning." And no compassion, no human sense of, "Oh my goodness, this is so hard for you. Like, here, I am here for you." I'm really I'm just so sad to hear your experience, Sarah, and also sad to think about the fact that this was not uncommon. This was a very common experience, and just how gross that is. Like, that's so, it was just negligence. There was so much negligence. So I know, whatever, it's a whole big story, it's a whole thing that happened, but like it's just really, really hard to think, wow, that impacted you as a mother. It impacted your baby in a way that was just really inhumane. And I hate to hear that. At the same time, we can take a breath and say, I'm really, really happy that this did act as a catalyst in a really powerful way for you, where you took a situation that was really not cool and then decided, oh, wait, I can open this up and look further into this and actually make powerful changes for my family. So, not a victim mentality at all, quite the opposite. That's really powerful to hear, and I'm excited to hear you dive into that a little bit more. How did that happen?
Yeah, so like I said, I kind of went to Facebook to maybe find like a support group for what I had experienced because I just heard some recommendations about sharing your story and how powerful that can be just to release that, release the guilt, release the anything, the emotions behind what happened so that I could step back and look at the experience and say, learn from maybe some of the things that I wish I had done differently. And so I found a couple Facebook groups that they were sharing some like birth workshops. And it was actually Kylie Banks when she was doing the autonomous birth workshops. So I listened to a few of her free programs and I just took a bunch of notes. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to spend this postpartum year just doing a lot of research because we knew we weren't done having children. And so I wanted to be more proactive. I wanted to really know more about my body, the choices that I could make, and just what's birth supposed to look like, because I really felt like, first I had to be induced. And then, the second, things were all over the place as far as what we thought was going to happen with the baby. I thought maybe, there were some choices that I could make to maybe, things might be a little bit different next time. And so that's also when I found the Happy Home Birth podcast and started just listening to so many episodes and just eating up the birth stories. And I'm like, oh, I love this. And it just gave me a good broad picture of not just what birth is supposed to look like, but what it can look like because there's so many ways that it can go. And it was a healthy perspective on looking to the future and realizing there's things that I can do to prepare, but there's also the element of we can't control it. We can't control what happens. And even if I had made different choices with my second pregnancy or even after she was born, would it have really changed the outcome? We don't know. We just know that, going forward, I can have some more information to make better choices. So I listened to the podcast a lot. I came across a Christian home birth course that came with a membership program. Shout out to the Sister Birth Embrace Birth Journey. And so that was also a smaller community of women who were also pregnant at the same time. And so every week we would have a call together and we could pray for each other. And that was so helpful in not just during the research phase or the next pregnancy phase, but also just kind of unpacking everything that happened before. And just having that, like-minded community of people was so important too. I feel like having community and also just really spending the time to look into and research everything that you can about birth, that was so helpful to me. And I also learned about the benefits of chiropractic from the Home Birth podcast. We had been going to a chiropractor during my postpartum year after my second, and so I knew I wanted to continue that during the next pregnancy as well. But here on the podcast and hearing the chiropractors talking about the benefits, it just really like solidified that for me. So during that research phase, I just made a list of like all kinds of questions, like what kind of midwife was I going to want? What were my non-negotiables? What was I willing to be more flexible with? How would we deal with a transfer? Because my biggest fear was to go to the hospital again. I really didn't want that to happen, but to look at it more, objectively and say, okay, if this happens, how would we approach that situation? And just kind of have a more logical approach to it as opposed to letting my fear and my emotions cloud the what ifs. Obviously, you can't prepare for every scenario, but I did my best to really look at, the biggest things that could happen and visualize what my ideal birth would look like, but also really sit with the idea that it may not go how I want it to. I'm dreaming of having this be my redemptive home birth from a really traumatic situation, but I might not get that, or it may not look like how I want it to. If it ends in a transfer, or if, any number of other things happen that I don't really want, am I going to let that color how I see that situation? So, knowing all of that, I really want to do a home birth with my next one. We started trying for our next baby in early 2022, and I got the positive test in April of that year. And I think the day or two after I got the test, I was already calling midwives. I had made a list and just started calling them and asking them some questions and kind of feeling out, does this kind of feel right? Because that was another thing is a lot of the women on the podcast are like, I just clicked with my midwife and I knew she was the one. And I was kind of hoping for that like little spark moment, like, oh, she's the one. I didn't really feel that, but I did feel more of a comfort with the one that I chose. Just the way that she answered my questions was very relaxed. And, when I asked her things like, how hands on or hands off are you during the pregnancy and the birth? And her response was, well, as much as you want me to be. If you want me to be hands on, I will. If you want me to sit back, I will. So I was like, okay, I'm cool with that. Let's do it. So immediately just the change in the quality of care was amazing. It was just, I felt seen, I felt heard and respected, and she was very aligned with how I wanted to approach pregnancy. And one of the big things during my research phase was I wanted to be more like holistic, and I didn't want to have to take medication. I think I forgot to mention earlier, I have had severe sickness through most of the first and second trimester for all of my pregnancies. And I've tried all the things. I've tried all the natural stuff, and it just did not touch it. So I was really hoping that this time I would be able to take my supplements and eat better and it would keep the nausea away. That all went out the window, and I called the midwife and I said, I need medication. I'm sorry. I need a prescription. But she was very happy to help, and I still struggled through those first 2 trimesters even with medication. But that was kind of my first having to pivot from what I really wanted or what I'd hoped my pregnancy would look like, and having to release that and be like, okay, this isn't really how I wanted it to go, but we're going to go with it and just trust in the next step. And so I did have chiropractic during that pregnancy, which was awesome. So yeah, the midwifery care was definitely a night and day difference from what I had experienced in the hospital. With my first pregnancy, I did, like I said, I had hospital midwives, and they were great. I loved my midwife. She was awesome. But again, the care just changed during that second pregnancy during COVID. And so to go from that and then go to, like, the hour-long appointments with the midwife who's really sitting down and not just listening, but taking the time to really explain everything. It was such a night and day difference. And I felt so relaxed every time I went to her office. And it wasn't like, dreading having to go to my prenatal appointments. She did most of my blood draws, so I almost never had to go to the lab. It was awesome. And again, I felt like she really cared about me, and she, took my concerns to heart as far as everything that happened before. But we were both very aligned in that we would be on the same page if we had to shift our focus or if things had to happen a little bit differently. And then this pregnancy, I did hire a doula. One of the big things was because I was going to be doing this unmedicated for the first time, I was a little bit nervous about pain management and, am I really going to be able to handle this? So we found an awesome doula. And the other thing that I was concerned about is if we did have to go to the hospital, that I wasn't going to have that extra support. If my husband had to be gone again, I just didn't want to face another scenario where I'm all alone. So having a doula would have been really awesome that time for me. So kind of being a little bit proactive with hiring the doula. Overall, the pregnancy went really smoothly aside from being super sick. And, it was a normal anatomy scan. It was such a breath of fresh air to be like, oh yeah, she looks perfect. We got to the end of pregnancy and I had the GBS test. And I wasn't really thinking anything of this because, I've had it before and it was fine. So I'd, not really have to think about that. And this time it came back positive for GBS. And I'm like, of course, that's my first home birth. And this is the one time that I test GBS positive. So I tried a few things that my midwife suggested and it didn't work. We retested and it was still positive. So I really didn't want to do antibiotics, but facing that scenario of this isn't really something that I wanted to do, but I was trying to approach everything from if we have to go to the hospital, I want the least amount of intervention. I want it to be a lot smoother experience. So I did decide to do the antibiotics just out of an abundance of caution. I think, again, I didn't really want them, but it was more of a precaution thing at that point. Another thing that we did this year was we decided to sell a vehicle, buy a vehicle, and buy a house. So it ended up the timing of buying the house was just insane. It was at the end of my pregnancy. We were looking at closing. I think it was a day or so after my due date. And they ended up pushing it back, thankfully. But it was still nerve-wracking to be like, am I going to be like having a baby and they're going to call and say, hey, you got to come in for closing? So I don't recommend buying a house when you're, 38 weeks pregnant. But yeah, it was another one of those things that just it interrupted my peace a little bit at the end, and it's something that I wish I would have just, maybe waited a few more months before we said, "All right, let's do this." Thankfully, the timing ended up being perfect for our family and, God worked everything out for us, but it was still stressful, and that's something that I wish I had just kind of kept my peace at the end and not had to worry about all these outside things, because as I got closer to the end, I was starting to feel that fear creeping back in of transferring, or what if I can't do it, or, all those things that I had tried to work throughout the pregnancy. It just started coming back up toward the end. And even though I was feeling all of that stress and all those things coming back up, it was such a great opportunity for me to practice that trust and surrender to whatever this looks like or whatever the outcome is. It's okay. I'm not going to go into this with fear, and I'm just going to be open to whatever is about to happen.
Wow, that is beautiful. Okay, I will have to say, so my husband and I have renovated our house a decent amount in the last couple of months. And after having gone through that experience, and we moved out into a family member's apartment for a little while this was going on, and the stress of that situation was so unbelievably high. We have not moved since we've been married. We moved into our home when we were pregnant with our first and have stayed there this entire time. And oh my word. Like now, looking back at all of the interviews that I've done where someone's like, and we moved while I was pregnant, I'm like, how? Could somebody explain to me how? Because it just like fills me with so much like stress, the moving process now. Like even just moving things out of our house and back in and blah, 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 like this and that. I have so much respect for anyone who is able to actually do that. It is wild to me. Way more shockingly difficult than I expected. So just had to throw that out there. But also, okay, this is a great buildup to the birth. So we see that, in your pregnancy, you had these things that you wanted. You truly wanted them. You had done the research and you also had this understanding of, okay, this is what I want. And I also am aware that sometimes things might not go exactly that way. Am I going to allow that to hinder my experience, or am I going to roll with it in a strong, confident way? And so you've already had a couple of little things that have popped up here and there that you've had to work through that and practice that. So I'm curious to hear how, if that's going to impact your birth experience as well. Would you mind jumping into how that birth unfolded?
So in Florida, we can only go to 42 weeks before a midwife will drop her care. Unfortunately, I really wish that would change. So we crept into 41 weeks, and she said if I did the biophysical profile that it would push that date back, I think, by 2 days. So I'm like, I'll do whatever I have to give us some more time. And because I had gone over for my other two as well, I kind of had a feeling we were going to go past that 40 weeks for sure. So 41 weeks, I had the biophysical profile. She actually came to my mom's house to do it. So my daughters got to, see the ultrasound and see the baby, and they thought that was so cool. That morning, I did notice that I was starting to feel some contractions. It wasn't like anything to stop what I was doing, but I did notice them. I'd had contractions prior to my labor with my second, but they were very similar, just, very light. I could do normal things, but they ended up putting me on Pitocin for both of those births, and then having water broken and the epidural for both of those births as well. So in my experience, it really felt like I hadn't truly gone into labor before. So I was a little bit nervous about, would I know if I was actually in labor. So when I felt those contractions kind of starting in the early morning, I paid attention to them, but I also ignored them because I'm like, I don't want to get my hopes up. I have the BPP to do today, and we'll just kind of see where things are going. So I spent the day at my mom's house. At the time, we only lived like 15 minutes away. So as the day progressed, I was noticing the contractions were continuing, and I took a nap around, I want to say it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I couldn't really rest very well. So when I got up, I just started timing the contractions. They were still like 20 minutes apart, but I was noticing them, like they were happening frequently. And earlier that day, I'd gotten a message from my husband saying, my nose has been really bothering me. I took a Claritin, so I should be okay. But as the day progressed, he said that he was feeling worse. He actually works at the same place as my dad and my brothers, so they all rode home. They were carpooling at the time. They all came back to my mom's house for dinner. By then, he was really looking rough. He was feeling bad. So we just had dinner. I was just kind of continuing to feel the contractions and timing them. And while we were eating, I said, why don't we just let's get the stuff for the girls to stay here, and we'll just go home and kind of see how things progress tonight. Because I started having this feeling like this might be the night. And I wasn't sure, but I just wanted to prepare. So he went back to our apartment and brought the stuff back for the girls, and we got them settled in at my mom's. And the drive back home, he was literally just, my husband was just shaking like a leaf, and he was coming down with something. We got home and I said, why don't you just go lay down, and I'll be out here in the living room. And, because if tonight's the night, I want to make sure that you get lots of rest. So he went to bed, and I kind of just stayed out in the living room and watched YouTube and crocheted, sat on my ball. And so around 9 o'clock, I laid down on the couch because I was still having the contractions. And I'm like, I think I need to try to rest because it might be tonight, and I want to rest, but I couldn't sleep. I could not. I started not being able to rest through the contractions. It was uncomfortable to lay down. It was uncomfortable to sit. So I was only there for maybe 45 minutes. I got up and took a shower thinking maybe that will kind of, if it's not real labor, it will slow things down. And it picked up in the shower. I really started to have to vocalize during the contractions, and I thought for sure my husband was going to wake up and be like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" No, he slept like a log. I'm over here in the shower just like, "Oh my gosh, this hurts." And he's sleeping. It was good though because I wanted to make sure that he was resting. And so I went out in the kitchen. I tried to make myself a snack, and I wish I had cut up all my cheese and deli meat beforehand because I'm trying to cut cheese and I'm dealing with a contraction. And so I'm like, I went and woke him up and I said, I think it's really happening, and I think I'm gonna call the midwife and the doula. I just let him know. I wasn't asking him to get up because again, it's like sleep until the last minute. Because if you're feeling bad, I don't want you up any more than you need to be. And that was another thing that we didn't expect was him to come down sick during labor. So we just kind of had to roll with it. And I tried to give him as much rest as he possibly could have before things got crazy. And so around 11 o'clock, I called my midwife and just kind of let her know how I was feeling. She lived about an hour away. So she's like, I'll just head over. And then I called my doula and let her know. And I actually had a contraction on the phone with her. And she's like, yep, it sounds like it's time. I'm going to head over too. So my midwife got there a little bit after midnight and checked me. And I was already at an 8, like a stretchy 8, which
Wow.
I was like so shocked by that because I would say I really started noticing it start amping up around 9 o'clock. For it to be such a short amount of time and already be that dilated, it was a shock to me for sure. So she started getting the pool set up, and I woke up my husband so he could help her. And the doula got there around, it was a little after 1 o'clock, I think. And we're having trouble getting the water to the pool because I don't know, it was something about the adapter. It was just not staying on correctly. So they had to do some weird thing to fill up the tub. So it wasn't as full as it should have been, but I was like, it's fine. I just want to get in. Like it covered me enough. And right before I got in the pool, she did do the shot of antibiotic. That would have been around 12:30, 12:45-ish. And I got in the pool about 1 o'clock and I could not sit down. Like I wanted to sit back and lean back in the pool. Anytime that I was sitting, the contraction was just so intense and horrible. Like I couldn't sit. It was rough sitting down in the chair to have the shot done. And so I finally got in the pool, and it just the peace that I felt when I got in there, it was so wonderful. The heat felt so good around my belly, and I had my birth playlist on, and we'd actually put some Christmas music in my playlist too because it was right around Christmas time. I had my Christmas tree up with the lights twinkling, and the birth pool with the lights in it, and it just felt so relaxed and peaceful. And my doula asked if she could pray once I got settled in the pool, and I said absolutely. And that too was just so powerful to have your whole care team there praying with you, and believing for a good outcome, and believing that the Lord's will would be done no matter what. It was just that added another level of peace. And the contractions were intense, but I remember thinking while I was having them, it's going to get worse. And I was remembering how intense it felt before I got my epidural, but I was also on like the highest dose of Pitocin for both of those births. So doing my research, I knew that the Pitocin can really make the contractions feel like crazy and painful. But part of my mental prep was like, I was just preparing for it to feel worse because I had felt worse. While I was in the pool, it started feeling very intense, but I was very present in between each contraction. I was able to kind of like, say, hey, this is over here, or just interact with the care team and my husband and just talk normally in between them. So everything that I had heard about when you get close to transition is that you just go into yourself and it's very intense and close together contractions. And so I was waiting for that to happen and it hadn't happened yet, but I'd been in the pool for about an hour. While I was in the pool, I just remember one point the thought was going through my head like, I'm here. I'm actually doing it. Like, I'm in the birth pool. I'm in my house. I'm with my husband and my doula, and it's quiet. I'm not in the hospital. And I just started weeping. And I couldn't vocalize why I was crying, but everything that was going through my head was like, I'm here. I'm not in the hospital right now. I think at some point I did say, I can't believe I'm really doing this. And it was just such a powerful moment for me that even if things go differently at the end, right now I'm here and I'm laboring at home exactly how I wanted to. My doula was just so wonderful, saying reassuring words and pouring warm water on my back during contractions. And my husband was too. He was doing his absolute best to just hang in there, and he was still shaking and he still felt horrible, but he sat there with me and held my hand and rubbed my back, and he was just amazing. He was a trooper. So it was a little bit after 2 o'clock in the morning on December the 20th. I was starting to feel a little bit pushy. But again, I hadn't had that moment of these are unbearable contractions. I can't talk through them. None of that was happening. So I'm like, there's no way that I could be ready to push right now. But I just kind of went with what felt right. And I did push with the contraction just to see how it felt. And my water broke. And so my midwife checked and she's like, yeah, the baby is pretty much like right there. So that just gave me this rush of adrenaline, like, oh my gosh, I'm almost at the end. Like I couldn't believe that it was already almost done. And this whole time I'm waiting for it to be like intense and unbearable and I can't do this anymore. Take me to the hospital. But that moment never came. So, here I am and the baby's crowning and I start to feel the ring of fire and I'm like, okay, this is it. And that just gave me the drive that I needed. And I think I only pushed like twice. And she was born within like 15 minutes from the time that I started pushing. My midwife caught her and handed her up to me out of the water. And I just, one of the first things that left my mouth, I looked at everyone, I was like, that was easy. And everybody had to laugh. Unfortunately, that part didn't get caught on camera, but that was one of the best parts to me. It was like, I couldn't believe that just came out of my mouth. That was easy.
I love that. I love it. It's like even as the words are leaving your mouth, you're like, "What?" Like that was easy. That was easy. What?
Yeah. So yeah, I was sitting there in the pool with her and just in disbelief that it happened and that it went better than I expected. And for me to even have that utterance of thinking it was easy. And I think just compared to how the first two felt before I got the epidural, feeling that out of control sensation, that unbearable on top of each other contractions, because I didn't have that, it did feel easy in comparison. So she was born, she latched really easy. It did look like I was bleeding a little bit more than the midwife would like, so we got right out of the tub and went to the bed. So I did agree to the shot of Pitocin as well, because again, it's not something that I wanted to do, but it was more of the out of precaution. I said, I just had this amazing home birth and I don't want to make it traumatic by having to go to the hospital. So, Pitocin it is. So, as I was having the newborn exam done, my poor husband is on the other side of the bed, just under all the blankets. He's got like 3 layers of clothes on, two blankets, and he's still cold. But he was just kind of like watching as they did the newborn exam, and I got to cut the cord, which is really cool. I've never done that before. And she looked perfect. Everything was fine. Everything went smoothly, and both of us were doing good. And I think they started wrapping things up around 4 o'clock in the morning. And she's like, well, just relax and settle in and try to get some sleep. I remember thinking after they left, I can just go to bed. Like, there's nobody checking in on me. There's nobody who's gonna wanna do, like, tests on the baby or, or blood sugar test on the baby, and we can just sleep and nurse, and it was such a wild experience and relaxed experience compared to before, and just the peace that came with that. Even though my husband was sick, thankfully, he was feeling a little better by the next morning, but it was such a time of peace for both of us to just be able to be together and be with the baby, and it's just everything that I had hoped for.
Wow. That is amazing. And really thinking about that, thank goodness you were at home with your husband not feeling well. That would have been so much more difficult in a hospital setting. So that's wonderful. And it's beautiful because that was not your last home birth. You have since then had another home birth. So it sounds like that experience really was a life changer for you and has changed the way that you give birth and the way that you experience pregnancy and motherhood. I love to hear that, Sarah.
Yeah, definitely. It was kind of when we had the next one, it was a no-brainer. We're having another home birth, and still just keeping that open mind. Things can happen, things can change, and this is my hope, is that we will have another home birth, but if things happen and we can't, then it's okay. And I'm happy to say that we did go on to have another awesome home birth, and it was just as quick, but definitely more intense, which was really interesting. And that was also hard, because now I have a really amazing home birth to compare it to. And so when it felt harder, physically and mentally, I had to, in the moment, really let go and say, this isn't that birth. This is going to be, it could be a completely different thing. And it might be longer. It might be harder. It was fast, but it was harder. And with that one, I just kept saying, I just want to be done. I was not saying that was easy at the end of that one.
That's fair.
But
They're not all that way.
right. But it was still an amazing experience, and I had an awesome midwife. I had to pick somebody else because we moved outside of the travel radius of my previous midwife, but this one was definitely God connection for sure. And just super supportive and exactly what I needed for that pregnancy and that birth. And so I'm at the end of having children. I like that to be our last baby. Just because the pregnancy is very challenging, with the sickness, and it was very hard to care for my family during that time. But obviously, we're just going to trust the Lord, and if it's His will for us to someday have another one, then we will trust Him to provide for us and help me get through that pregnancy. So, but
Yeah.
as it is right now, I am done having children.
Wow. Well, with that in mind, Sarah, just thinking about your entire experience, if you had to summarize, if you wanted one takeaway for the listeners today, what would you say here at the end? What would you want them to know?
Well, definitely that research is so, so important. Try to look into as much as you can. And if you think that you know it all, look some more, because learning about, how our body is designed to birth really helped to inform the choices that I made going forward into the next few pregnancies. And even though I thought I knew a lot about it with my first two, when I started delving into, from the biological aspect of things, it just informed my choices a lot better. And the other big thing is that, you might have a vision for what you want, and that's great. I think you should still keep that in mind, but also be very open to things changing, because while there are lots of things that you can control, like what you eat, what you're doing during pregnancy, the type of care that you have or that you choose, those are choices that you can make. But there are many circumstances that'll happen that might change other aspects of that pregnancy and that birth that are outside of your control, and to just recognize that if things happen that were not what you planned, to not hold any guilt for that, to release that and be like, I've done what I can to release that and be, I can't control these outside circumstances, and I'm just going to pivot and do what we can with the circumstances that we're given. So just being very open to a different approach.
That's beautiful. Oh, Sarah, this has been an incredible story and so joyful to hear your journey and all that you have learned on it. It really has been so great to have you. Thank you, Sarah, so much for coming on the Happy Home Birth podcast.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I really appreciate it.
In this episode, we heard how a mother was absolutely shocked when, during her third birth and first home birth, her contractions never seemed to spin out of control as they had in her previous hospital births. What do you think the difference was? My friends, our bodies are so intelligent, and the hormones of labor act as though they are different musical instruments within an orchestra, all playing their part to make up a labor symphony. When left undisturbed, it is incredible the balance and brilliance that they compose. But what happens when synthetic hormones are thrown into the mix in the hospital? In today's educational tidbit segment, I'd like to focus on Pitocin. Pitocin, the synthetic version of oxytocin. Now, if you know about oxytocin, you know that it's a primary hormone in labor and it's referred to as the love hormone. Oxytocin is a driver for contractions, and it's actually secreted from both mother and baby in an intricate dance. The brain, the uterus, specifically the cervix, and your baby are all involved in oxytocin's release. Now, let's compare that to Pitocin. Pitocin does not cross into your brain. It goes straight to the uterus and tells it, contract, more, harder, now, instead of the rhythmic squeeze and release dance that mama and baby play with natural oxytocin. Pitocin tends to just squeeze and squeeze some more, which can be much more relentless for both the mother and the baby, playing into what is known as the cascade of interventions. Now, oftentimes, mothers who have had Pitocin-induced births in the hospital before giving birth at home are shocked at how much more manageable labor can be when left alone at home. Now, does this mean that I am promising you an easier labor at home? No, of course not. But goodness, doesn't it make sense that when our body and baby are the ones running the show, that they might, I don't know what they're doing? Know how much of each hormone is needed and when it's needed? So, if you, like the mother in today's episode, have experienced hospital births with Pitocin and find yourself worrying about what labor will be like unmedicated, keep this in mind. You just might get to the end and think, that was easier than I expected. All right, let's jump into this week's episode roundup. Okay, how cool was that? It just never gets old to me. A mother growing in her understanding and knowledge as she goes on and making changes with her newfound information. There's so much beauty in it. Let's jump into this week's episode roundup and explore these themes more. So, number one, I love how Sara chose to grow with new information. She didn't hold on to her past ways of doing things, and she also didn't punish herself for not knowing what she didn't know. She simply gained the new information and put it into action for herself and her family. No blaming, no shaming, just growth. Next, I also appreciate Sara's perspective of how she wanted to enter her birthing experience. She didn't feel like she had to control everything, and in fact, she was very aware that she could not. She simply took control of the areas that she could and then held the rest with an open hand and open mind. She was comfortable with the idea that she couldn't predict every little detail and that she would be willing to make the decisions that made sense in the moment. And finally, just how beautiful is it to hear a mother experience their first unmedicated birth and think at the end, that was easy? What a joy to see just how wonderfully we are made and how beautifully birth was designed. Whether you come to the end of labor thinking that was easy or that was intense, my prayer is that you feel a sense of deep strength at what you've been designed to do. You were made with intention and love, as is your baby. I want you to feel flooded with that knowing as you bring your baby into your arms. Okay, my friends, that's all I've got for you for today. I'll see you back here next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Are you looking to extend the home birth support, encouragement, and education? Join us in our Facebook group, Happy Home Birth Podcast Community, and check us out on Instagram at Happy Home Birth Podcast.